If you have missed out on all the late-night action of the Prime Minister's America visit, we've got you covered. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the biggest headline, at least from day one, was his meeting with US Vice-President Kamala Harris. Their maiden meet since Kamala took over as the US Vice-President. A range of issues were discussed: the COVID pandemic, trade ties, and also, importantly, terror. Here's a report on all the highlights of that meeting.
Hard-nosed diplomacy,
the climate crisis,
fond remembrance of a shared background, and a tour of the Eisenhower Tower. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first meeting with US Vice-President Kamala Harris, who traces her roots to India, was hectic and filled with optics. The two leaders addressed the media jointly.
About the pride.
Kamala Harris began by lauding India's decision to restart Vaccine Maitri, the mission to export vaccines to low-income countries.
On COVID-19, our nations have worked together. Early in the pandemic, India was a vital source of vaccines for other countries.
India's phenomenal vaccination drive too caught the United States Vice President's eye.
It is of particular note and admiration that India, I'm told, is currently vaccinating approximately 10 million people a day as of today.
In the backdrop of Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, Kamala Harris stressed on the need to work together to strengthen democracy.
As democracies around the world are under threat, it is imperative that we defend democratic principles and institutions within our respective countries and around the world.
Kamala Harris also remembered her Indian connection.
I know from personal experience and from my family of the commitment of the Indian people to democracy and to freedom and to the work that may be done and can be done to imagine and then actually achieve our vision for democratic principles and institutions.
Prime Minister Modi thanked the United States for extending help during the second COVID wave.
जब भारत कोविड की दूसरी लहर से बहुत ही पीड़ित था, बड़ा संकट था, लेकिन उस समय जिस प्रकार से आत्मीयता से आपने भारत की चिंता की, जो शब्द व्यक्त किए और जो सहायता के लिए हाथ बढ़ाया, इसके लिए मैं फिर एक बार हृदय से आपका आभार व्यक्त करता हूं।
Prime Minister Modi emphasized on supply chain resilience, an area of interest for both countries given the global economy's dependence on China.
सप्लाई चेन की मजबूती, नवीनतम टेक्नोलॉजी और अंतरिक्ष जैसे क्षेत्रों में आपकी विशेष रुचि है। यह क्षेत्र मेरे लिए भी विशेष प्रायोरिटी के हैं। इन क्षेत्रों में हमारे बीच सहयोग बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है।
The PM hailed Kamala Harris's historic election victory, describing her elevation to one of the most powerful positions in the world as an inspiration to many.
आपका उपराष्ट्रपति के नाते चुने जाना अपने आप में एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण घटना है, ऐतिहासिक घटना है, और आप पूरे विश्व के में बहुत से लोगों के लिए प्रेरणा स्रोत है।
Prime Minister Modi closed his statement by inviting Kamala Harris to India.
भारत के लोग भी चाहेंगे कि भारत में आपकी इस ऐतिहासिक विजय यात्रा को सम्मानित करें, आपका स्वागत करें, इसलिए मैं आपको विशेष रूप से भारत आने का निमंत्रण देता हूं।
That wasn't all. After the official engagements, Kamala Harris was seen giving a tour of iconic Eisenhower Tower, situated west of the White House. With Geeta Mohan in Washington, D.C., Bureau Report, India Today.
And let's take this across to our Foreign Affairs editor, Geeta Mohan. She's joining us from Washington, D.C. with all the latest updates. Geeta, to you, what really were the takeaways, the big highlights of the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Vice President Kamala Harris?
Well, it was an interesting meeting, a lot of anticipation in terms of what to expect from the meeting. But it turns out that Vice President Kamala Harris and Prime Minister Narendra Modi focused on bilateral, regional and global issues more than anything else. Yes, there was a clear statement that democratic values need to be respected and honored, and that was a message not just for countries that have been disrespectful but also aimed at Afghanistan. More importantly over here, the conversation on COVID was very interesting because the kind of cooperation and help that was extended by India to the US, and now also looking at appreciation with regards to India starting exporting of vaccines again, is something that went down very well both in Washington DC as also in New Delhi. But more importantly, it's the regional security and global security scenario that was of prime importance, and China certainly a part of the conversations when it comes to securing the Indo-Pacific. These are key areas when it comes to India and the United States of America, and the tone and tenor certainly set for the meeting, the big meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Biden, as also the Quad Summit that is going to focus and discuss the Indo-Pacific region containing China, but more importantly, it's not just containing China and Chinese aggression, also looking at resilient supply chain to ensure that India is a key part of a global supply chain where countries are not fully only dependent on China.
Right. Geeta, stay on with us. We're going to need your inputs through this broadcast as well on some other topics that we'll be covering on the Prime Minister's visit to America. But when we focus on the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Vice President Kamala Harris, there was a detailed discussion, we're told, also on the issue of terror. And in that conversation, Vice President Kamala Harris didn't shy away from naming and shaming Pakistan. The US Vice President read out the Riot Act to Islamabad over its complicit role in aiding terror. Kamala reportedly suo referred to Pakistan's role in terror. She said that terror groups are working in the country and asked Islamabad to take action so it doesn't have an impact on US's and India's security. According to Foreign Secretary Harshvi Shringla, when the issue of terror came up during talks with Prime Minister Modi, Kamala Harris suo referred to Pakistan's undeniable imprint on encouraging and aiding terror elements. She also agreed with Prime Minister Modi's briefing on cross-border terror and the fact that India has been a victim of terrorism for several decades. Kamala Harris also reiterated the need to monitor Pakistan's role in supporting terror.
When the issue of terrorism came up, the Vice President suo motu referred to Pakistan's role in that regard. She said that there were terror groups that were working there. She asked Pakistan to take action so that these groups do not impact on US security and that of India. She agreed with the Prime Minister's briefing on the fact of cross-border terrorism and the fact that India had been a victim of terrorism for several decades now, and all the need to rein in and closely monitor Pakistan's support for such terrorist groups.
Let's sum up all the big takeaways of the meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US Vice President Kamala Harris. It was the first time that they met, and the biggest talking point, the biggest takeaway has been on the issue of terror. Pakistan's role in terrorism was highlighted not just by India but also by the United States, with Vice President Kamala Harris also naming Pakistan. There was also a focus on Afghanistan and what's happened to Afghanistan with the Taliban takeover. That too was discussed. There was also free and open trade in the Indo-Pacific region being discussed, particularly keeping in mind China's aggression. Increasing renewable energy was another talking point between Vice President Kamala Harris and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Then you also had environmental sustainability. This also includes issues of climate change and how both countries can cooperate on that front. Cooperation in space technology, in new tech, that too was discussed. India and US have for long had great ties with regards to space tech as well. Efforts to contain the COVID pandemic, very important. Vaccine distribution, steps to ensure the technology on that front is exchanged was also brought up. Expedited vaccination drives was also discussed between Prime Minister Modi and Vice President Kamala Harris. Ensuring a supply of critical medicines. There's been a lot of talk between India and US amid a pandemic on this topic. This was brought up again between Prime Minister Modi and Vice President Harris. And let's also get you details of what's expected today. Day 2 of Prime Minister Modi's visit is perhaps the most important because at 8:30 p.m., that's Indian Standard Time, Prime Minister Modi will be holding his first in-person bilateral meet with US President Joe Biden. Lots of the agenda, all issues will be discussed. And this is a meeting that not just India and US will watch, but the entire world.
It's a meeting that will have repercussions across the globe spectrum. The leaders of world's oldest democracy and world's largest democracy face to face as the world closely watches. US President Joe Biden will be hosting Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House on Friday. This will be the first time Joe Biden is meeting Prime Minister Modi in person after being elected as the President of the US. The last time Joe Biden met Prime Minister Modi in person was back in 2014, when Biden was the Vice President under Barack Obama's presidency. The two leaders last spoke on the phone in April during the peak of the COVID crisis, when Prime Minister Modi thanked the US for its support and solidarity in time of need. In the last 6 months, a lot has changed. The global economy is shaky. Taliban is back in Afghanistan, and China is aggressively widening its influence. The two leaders will have their task cut out, from vaccines to climate change to defense. Tonight's meeting will have a lot riding on it. Bureau Report, India Today.
And let's take this back across to Geeta Mohan reporting live for us from Washington, D.C. Geeta, what's really on the agenda of the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and US President Joe Biden? What are the issues that will be discussed?
Well, this is going to be the first meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Biden after he assumed office. Not the first time that the two leaders are meeting, but certainly the first time with President Biden in office. A crucial one also at that, because we know that during campaigning, there was a lot of endorsement that came Trump's way from Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But Indo-US ties is a continuum. They are a continuum and they don't really change. Policies with regards to these two countries have been consistent on many accounts, but there are challenges. The challenges are on the issue of visas. The challenges are on the issue of trade. A free trade agreement still is elusive. We still have not seen whether if the two countries are really going to come together to find a middle path to trade better between the two sides. That certainly is an area of concern. Economic cooperation, when you talk about that, you're talking about a post-COVID world where both countries need to cooperate to ensure resilience, and not just in the market system, but also in the global economy. And India and the United States of America can play a very, very crucial role. Apart from that, it's the regional security and global security situation that is of great importance, and it will come up. US withdrawal from the United States of America is a concern for India, because for India, the biggest ally in Afghanistan was America. And with them gone, the security scenario for India changes dramatically. Also recognition of the Taliban government. It is not inclusive. The non-inclusivity is an aspect that is going to be discussed between the two sides, and how to go about engaging a government that has not a single woman in their cabinet, has discriminated against the minorities within their own country. So these are aspects that are certainly going to come up for India. Terrorism is a concern. Pakistan might come up, but China certainly is going to be a part of the conversation.
It's as I said, this is a meeting that the world will be watching. Geeta, stay on with us. Now, it will be interesting to see what is the equation between Prime Minister Modi and US President Joe Biden, particularly because the Prime Minister, every time he's touched down in the United States and met with past presidents, whether it was Obama or Donald Trump, always had a personal, very warm equation with them and a very personal interaction. Will that be the case with US President Biden as well? We'll know in a few hours from now, but we decode that and more in this report.
If there's one place Prime Minister Narendra Modi feels at home outside India, it would be the United States. In the 7 years he's been the Prime Minister, this is his 7th visit to the country. And over this period, he has interacted with 3 presidents, Joe Biden, the latest. Indo-US relations under Modi are also about the personal touch he brings to the negotiating table. President Barack Obama, for instance, is friend Barack. A friend to whom he personally served tea. In Donald Trump, Prime Minister Modi found another friend and ally. India carried out surgical strikes in POK after the Uri terror attack and later launched airstrikes on Jaish-e-Mohammed terror camps deep inside Pakistan in Balakot. The US under Trump stood with New Delhi. There were missteps as well, the biggest letdown being edged out of the peace talks in Afghanistan. The camaraderie, however, was too good to believe. It led Prime Minister Modi to Houston, where he, many felt, openly endorsed Trump for a second term.
The words of candidate Trump, "Ab ki baar, Trump Sarkar."
They even took out a victory lap in front of a thrilled diaspora. On many issues, the Biden administration may take a different line from Trump's. If Trump was silent when India abrogated Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir, Biden and his Democrat colleagues during the presidential campaign had criticized the decision, much to our discomfort. But much has happened since then. The global economy is shaky after the worst humanitarian crisis since the World War. The Taliban is back in Afghanistan, posing an even bigger terror threat to the world. Pakistan continues its old game of blackmail diplomacy. The Chinese are spreading their influence aggressively. The world is no more unipolar. There are fears of another Cold War.
We're not seeking, say it again, we are not seeking a new Cold War or a world divided into rigid blocks. The United States is ready to work with any nation that steps up and pursues peaceful resolution to shared challenges, even if we have intense disagreements in other areas.
Day 2 is going to be about the big Quad in-person summit meeting between and among the Quad leaders, and the bilateral between President Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, where the focus is going to be Afghanistan, counter China, resilient supply chains, as also post-COVID recovery and economic cooperation. With video journalist Yokendra Singh in Washington DC, Geeta Mohan for India Today.
So later today, on day 2 of the Prime Minister's visit in America, he is also going to be a part of the Quad Summit, which has India, the United States, Japan and Australia. And before the Quad Summit, the Prime Minister also had bilateral meets with Australia Prime Minister Scott Morrison, as well as Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga. And here's a report on exactly what was discussed in those bilateral meetings.
The exclusive club of 4 of the world's top leaders. For the first time, all the Quad leaders sitting across the table. President Biden, Prime Minister Modi, the Australian and Japanese premiers meet on Friday to brainstorm on global and regional issues. The focus is the Indo-Pacific, but the summit being held in an eventful year will discuss the pandemic response, particularly strengthening the vaccine supply chain, along with climate change and education. Ahead of the crucial Quad Summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi met his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison. In the meeting, Prime Minister Modi discussed a wide range of topics, including deepening economic ties between the two countries. Prime Minister Modi also held bilateral talks with his Japanese counterpart Yoshihide Suga. Both are members of the Quadrilateral Security Alliance, or the Quad. And 3 hours before the 4 leaders meet, the Prime Minister will hold his first bilateral meeting with President Biden. The summit in Washington will be closely monitored 11,000 kilometers away in Beijing. The quadrilateral grouping aims at countering the growing Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific region. Quad's target is a free and open Indo-Pacific, unconstrained by coercion. It's an informal strategic dialogue between 4 like-minded nations to negate China's expansionism. The first in-person summit of the Quad comes at an important time, with the Indo-Pacific undergoing a geopolitical churn. And with Biden taking the lead in hosting it, the United States is signaling its resolve to defend its interest in the Indo-Pacific. With Geeta Mohan in Washington, D.C., Bureau Report, India Today.
So this will be the first in-person Quad Summit. All the world leaders coming together in Washington, D.C. for that meeting. Geeta Mohan is also reporting from Washington with all the latest updates on the Quad Summit as well. Geeta, there's going to be a number of issues that are discussed, and this meeting will be watched very closely because of the timing also. What's happening in Afghanistan, China's aggression, etc.
Well, it is the biggest summit when it comes to India and the Security, Trade, Connectivity Alliance. The quadrilateral leaders are here: US, India, Japan, Australia, and they're going to meet here at the White House. It is going to be the first in-person quadrilateral summit. We've seen a lot of changes in the Quad. In only 1 year's time, it has gone from being an official level, that's joint secretary level, to ministerial level, to now heads of government and heads of state. That's how important this entire grouping is for all the countries concerned. We know that there's a lot of conversation with regards to AUKUS, that's Australia, UK, United States of America military alliance, and whether if that is going to impact Quad. Many say that it would impact, but not negatively, because now there is a focused attention on military alliance helping Australia to counter China. So that's a plus, but a lot others say that Quad could have been more than just the kind of grouping that it is today. It might grow, it might look stronger, but we do know, and we're given to understand from sources within the government, that there is going to be an important announcement in terms of deliverables from the Quad. So we'll watch out for what the joint statement is really going to come out with. But Quad is not just going to confine itself to the Indo-Pacific and China. It's not about containing China, most officers say. It's about telling China that they cannot continue bullying other countries. And India or other countries like Australia, Japan, the United States of America speak not just for themselves but for the smaller island nations, the smaller countries that China has been bullying in the Indo-Pacific. So that's going to be a focus area, but we're also given to understand that Quad leaders are going to discuss the situation in Afghanistan.
Right, Geeta, thank you for joining us on this broadcast with those details. As Geeta pointed out, China is something that will be discussed in the Quad summit. And here's another story about how China is continuing their aggressive ways and even going ahead and backing, very clearly endorsing the Taliban government in Afghanistan. China has hit out at the United States, calling for ending the economic sanctions on Afghanistan. China has urged the US not to use the frozen foreign exchange reserves of the war-torn country as what they call a bargaining chip to exert political pressure on the hardline terror group. Addressing the G20 foreign ministers via a video link, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi also demanded the rushing of humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan without any delay. He highlighted China's decision to provide 200 million yuan, that's 31 million US dollars aid, which includes 3 million vaccine doses. Wang Yi also asked the United States to release frozen foreign reserves of Afghanistan's central bank. Remember that the United States has frozen about 9.5 billion US dollars in assets belonging to Afghanistan's central bank and stopped also shipments of cash to Kabul in a bid to keep the Taliban from accessing the money and also misusing it. And it's because of what's happened in Afghanistan that the timing of the Prime Minister's visit to America is very, very crucial. So far in the meetings that he's held and even in the meetings that are going to be held, there's no doubt that Taliban will dominate discussions. How to deal with the Taliban government, what kind of dialogue should happen, all of that will be brought up. As far as India is concerned, our stand has been very clear. Pakistan has been seeking that the Taliban government be made part of SAARC, which India immediately shot down.
The unforgettable American pullout. The blood-drenched aftermath. And the rise of Afghanistan's godfathers of terror. And while the rest of the world tiptoed around the new rulers of a collapsed country, only one leader found it fit to point out a finger directly at the Taliban.
अफगानिस्तान में सत्ता परिवर्तन इंक्लूसिव नहीं है और बिना नेगोशिएशन के हुआ है। इससे नई व्यवस्था की स्वीकार्यता पर सवाल उठते हैं।
It is in the echo of those words that the Indian Prime Minister begins his crucial United States visit that kicks off with the first in-person Quad summit. It is in the shadow of the Taliban's rise and its overwhelming implications for regional security that Modi now confabulates with the superpower that dropped Afghanistan like a hot potato and breaks bread with President Joe Biden for the first time. Modi and Biden have met virtually on at least 3 occasions: the Quad Virtual Summit in March, the Climate Change Summit in April, and the G7 Summit in June this year. But the Taliban's lightning power grab in Afghanistan has set the overwhelming tone for Modi's visit. The US pullout, a move that has jeopardized India's strategic interests in Afghanistan, will get top billing in discussions. Though the Indian security establishment is clear that America has tried to wash its hands, China's shadow in Afghanistan ensures the United States cannot ever walk away completely. As the United States itself now breaks bread with the very Taliban it once hunted, navigating the dynamics of regional security will be Modi's biggest challenge. From Washington, Modi will travel to New York to address the general debate of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly on September 25th in New York. Here too, India's focus will remain the situation in Afghanistan and terrorism emanating from Pakistan. Multiple intelligence alerts have told India that the Al-Qaeda, ISIS Khorasan and other groups could be diverted to escalate violence in Kashmir. On this issue too, the Prime Minister has cleared decks on India's stand at the SCO summit.
अफगानिस्तान में हाल के घटनाक्रम का सबसे अधिक प्रभाव हम जैसे पड़ोसी देशों पर होगा। हमें मिलकर सुनिश्चित करना चाहिए कि अफगानिस्तान की धरती का उपयोग किसी भी देश में आतंकवाद फैलाने के लिए न हो।
While Pakistan, the emboldened new stakeholder in Afghanistan, is likely to attempt to derail all conversations at the UN again by raising Kashmir at the UN, India will remain focused on the issue of terrorism, regional security and Afghanistan. While the Quad nations will also center around the Afghanistan issue and the Chinese threat, all eyes will be on how Modi and Biden decide to work together as allies in a world that just became much more dangerous. With Geeta Mohan in Washington, D.C., Bureau Report, India Today.